That Tuesday evening started like any other disappointing day in what had become Lisa's new normal. She had spent the entire afternoon getting ready for something special. For weeks, she'd been planning a surprise dinner for Jake. She'd made reservations at the little Italian restaurant where they'd had their first official date 2 years ago. Lisa had even taken the afternoon off from her design work, something she rarely did since every client meant money they needed. She'd gone to the mall and bought a new dress. Nothing too fancy, just something that made her feel pretty and confident. It was deep blue, Jake's favorite color, though she wondered if he'd even remember that anymore. Back at their apartment, Lisa had spent an hour getting ready. She'd done her hair the way Jake used to say he loved, with soft curls that framed her face. She'd put on the perfume he'd bought her for her birthday last year, the bottle that had been sitting mostly unused on their dresser. At 6 p.m., Lisa sat on their couch, checking her phone every few minutes. The reservation was at 7:30. She'd told Jake about it 3 days ago, and he'd seemed genuinely excited. "That sounds perfect," he'd said, actually looking up from his laptop when she mentioned it. "I've been wanting to go back there." At 6:45, her phone buzzed. Lisa's heart sank before she even read the message. She already knew what it would say. "Hey babe, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to be stuck here until at least midnight. Big presentation tomorrow and my boss wants changes to everything. Rain check?" Lisa stared at the message for a long time. Rain check. That phrase had become Jake's answer to everything lately. Rain check on dinner. Rain check on the movie they'd planned to see. Rain check on visiting her parents last weekend. Rain check on their entire relationship, it felt like. She called the restaurant and canceled their reservation. The hostess was polite, but Lisa could hear the judgment in her voice. This was probably the third time Lisa had canceled a reservation in the past month. She was becoming that person, the one who couldn't keep her plans because her boyfriend was always working. Lisa sat in their quiet apartment, still wearing the new blue dress, and felt something crack inside her chest. It wasn't anger exactly. It was worse than that. It was the awful realization that she'd become invisible in her own relationship. She walked to the bathroom mirror and looked at herself. Really looked. When was the last time Jake had noticed? When she'd put effort into her appearance? When was the last time he'd complimented her, or even seemed to see her as anything more than a roommate who happened to share his bed? Lisa thought about all the small ways she'd been trying to get Jake's attention over the past few months. The notes in his bag that he never mentioned. The home-cooked meals that he ate while standing in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. The way she'd tried to start conversations about their future, only to have Jake nod along while clearly thinking about work. She'd been patient. She'd been understanding. She'd made excuses for him to her friends and family. "He's just going through a busy time," she'd tell them. "Once he gets this promotion, things will go back to normal." But sitting there in that blue dress, Lisa realized something scary. What if this was normal now? What if Jake had gotten so comfortable knowing she'd always be there, always understanding, always willing to wait, that he'd stopped trying altogether? Lisa walked to their bedroom and opened the closet. Hidden in the back, behind her winter coats, was a shoebox. Inside were all the little mementos from their early relationship, movie ticket stubs from their first date, the silly poem Jake had written her for Valentine's Day last year, photos from their weekend trip to the beach, where Jake had spent the entire time focused on her instead of his phone. Looking at those photos was like looking at strangers. The Jake in the pictures had his arm around Lisa, and he was looking at her like she was the most interesting person in the world. The Lisa in the pictures looked happy and secure, like she knew she was loved. When had they stopped being those people? Lisa put the box away and made herself a simple dinner. She sat at the kitchen table, still wearing the blue dress, eating pasta and looking at the flowers she'd bought that morning. They were starting to wilt already. Like everything else in their apartment, they were beautiful for a moment and then forgotten. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. Jake came home at 1:30 a.m. just like he'd predicted. He was quiet, trying not to wake her, but Lisa was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. She listened to him brush his teeth, change into his pajamas, and slip into bed beside her. For a moment, Lisa thought about turning over and talking to him. She wanted to tell him about the restaurant, about the dress, about how lonely she'd felt sitting in their apartment waiting for a text that never came. But Jake's breathing was already getting heavy with sleep, and Lisa knew that even if she tried to talk, his mind would be on tomorrow's presentation. Lisa lay there in the dark, listening to the man she loved sleep peacefully next to her, and made a decision that scared her more than anything she'd ever contemplated. She was tired of being the understanding girlfriend. She was tired of making excuses and waiting for things to get better. She was tired of feeling like she had to compete with Jake's job for his attention and losing every single time. Most of all, Lisa was tired of feeling like she didn't matter. Over the next few days, Lisa started planning something that went against every instinct she had. She wasn't a dramatic person. She didn't like being the center of attention or making scenes. She preferred to handle problems quietly, through conversation and compromise. But quiet hadn't worked. Conversation required someone willing to listen, and Jake had made it clear that his work would always come first. Compromise meant she kept giving up pieces of what she needed while Jake gave up nothing. Lisa realized that sometimes when someone you love has stopped seeing you, you have to do something impossible to ignore, something that forces them to make a real choice between what they think they want and what they actually need. The plan that formed in Lisa's mind over those sleepless nights was bold in a way that terrified her. It meant putting herself in a position of complete vulnerability. It meant risking everything on the chance that somewhere underneath Jake's work obsession, the man who used to love her still existed. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was slowly fading away until she became just another piece of furniture in their shared life, present but unnoticed, taken for granted until one day Jake might look up from his laptop and realize she'd been gone for months. Lisa spent a week gathering her courage. She practiced what she might say, how she might explain herself if her plan backfired. She imagined every possible reaction Jake might have, from anger to confusion to complete indifference. The scariest possibility wasn't that Jake would be upset with her. The scariest possibility was that even her most desperate attempt to reconnect with him wouldn't be enough to break through the wall he'd built between himself and everything that used to matter to him. But doing nothing was no longer an option. Lisa had reached the point where taking a risk felt safer than accepting the slow death of their relationship. The evening Lisa chose to change everything started just like all the others had for the past 3 months. Jake texted her at 7 p.m. with his usual message about working late. But this time, instead of typing back her standard, "Okay, see you later" response, Lisa stared at her phone for several minutes. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Tonight was the night she'd been planning for over a week. Tonight, she would find out if the man she fell in love with was still somewhere inside the workaholic Jake had become. Lisa had spent the entire day preparing, both mentally and physically. She'd cleaned their apartment from top to bottom, not because it was dirty, but because she needed something to do with her nervous energy. She'd changed the sheets on their bed, organized their bookshelf, and even cleaned out the refrigerator. Around 4 p.m., she'd started getting ready. Lisa had taken the longest shower of her life, washing her hair with the expensive shampoo she usually saved for special occasions. She'd moisturized her skin with the vanilla-scented lotion Jake used to say smelled amazing on her. But the most important part of her preparation wasn't physical. Lisa had to build up the courage to do something completely outside her comfort zone. She'd always been the modest one in their relationship, the one who changed clothes in the bathroom even after 2 years together. The idea of what she was planning made her stomach flip with nervousness. As evening approached, Lisa went around their apartment and lit every candle she could find. The vanilla ones from their coffee table, the lavender ones from their bedroom, even the emergency candles they kept in their kitchen drawer. Soon their home was filled with soft flickering light that made everything look warm and romantic. She turned off all the electric lights, leaving just the candles and the gentle glow they created. The apartment looked like a completely different place, mysterious, intimate, and beautiful. It looked like the kind of place where 2 people might fall in love, not the kind of place where one person worked on their laptop while the other felt invisible. Lisa put on music, not loud, just soft background songs that she and Jake used to listen to when they cooked dinner together on Sunday afternoons. back when they used to cook together at all. Then came the hardest part. Lisa stood in their bedroom, looking at herself in the full-length mirror they'd bought together when they first moved in. She thought about all the times over the past few months when she'd gotten dressed up for Jake, hoping he might notice, only to have him barely glance up from his phone. Tonight would be different. Tonight, there would be no way for Jake to look at his phone, no way for him to get distracted by work emails or tomorrow's meetings. Tonight, Lisa was going to demand his complete attention in a way that would be impossible to ignore. Lisa took off her clothes slowly, her hands shaking slightly. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and felt a surge of both fear and determination. This was either going to save their relationship or end it completely. There would be no middle ground after tonight. She positioned herself in their bedroom doorway, where Jake would see her the moment he opened the door. The candlelight flickered across her skin, making her feel both vulnerable and powerful at the same time. Lisa had never done anything like this before. She'd never been the kind of person who made bold gestures or dramatic statements, but desperate times called for desperate measures. And Lisa was desperate to know if Jake still cared enough about her to choose her over everything else that had been consuming his attention. The waiting was the hardest part. Lisa stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes listening for the sound of Jake's key in the door. Every car that drove past their building made her heart race, thinking it might be him coming home. She practiced what she might say when he walked in. Should she speak first or let the scene speak for itself? Should she explain what she was doing or let Jake figure it out on his own? Lisa had rehearsed different approaches in her mind, but now that the moment was almost here, she realized she had no idea what would actually come out of her mouth. At 12:47 a.m., Lisa finally heard Jake's footsteps in the hallway outside their apartment. Her entire body tensed with anticipation and fear. This was it. In the next few minutes, she would know whether the man she loved still existed somewhere inside the stranger Jake had become. She heard his key turning in the lock, then the familiar creak of their front door opening. Jake was trying to be quiet, just like he had been every night for months, assuming Lisa would already be asleep. "Lisa?" Jake called softly as he stepped inside. He must have noticed the candles immediately, because she heard him pause in their entryway. Lisa didn't answer. She couldn't trust her voice not to shake. Instead, she waited, her heart pounding so loud she was sure Jake would be able to hear it from across the apartment. She heard Jake's footsteps moving slowly through their living room, past the kitchen toward their bedroom. He was moving more carefully than usual, probably confused by all the candles and wondering what was going on. When Jake pushed open their bedroom door and saw Lisa standing there, everything seemed to freeze. The look on his face was exactly what Lisa had hoped for and feared at the same time, complete and total shock. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. Jake stood in the doorway with his work bag still slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened around his neck, looking like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Lisa watched his face carefully, trying to read his expression. Was he surprised? Confused? Happy? Annoyed that she'd interrupted his routine? She couldn't tell. And that uncertainty made her feel more vulnerable than she'd ever felt in her life. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Lisa had imagined this moment dozens of times over the past week, but she'd never imagined how intense the silence would feel. It was like the entire future of their relationship was hanging in the air, waiting to see what Jake would do next. Lisa's courage wavered for a moment. What if this was a terrible mistake? What if Jake was too tired or too stressed to appreciate what she was trying to do? What if he just wanted to get ready for bed and prepare for another day of meetings and presentations? But then Lisa remembered all the nights she'd fallen asleep alone while Jake worked beside her. She remembered all the canceled dinners, all the conversations that never happened, all the times she'd felt like she was competing with his job and losing. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly into Jake's eyes. This was her moment. This was her chance to find out if their relationship was worth fighting for, or if Jake had already chosen his career over everything else that used to matter to him. Whatever happened next would determine whether they still had a future together, or whether Lisa would need to find the strength to walk away from the only man she'd ever truly loved. The first thing Jake did when he saw Lisa standing there was reach for his phone. It was such an automatic reaction that he didn't even realize he was doing it. His hand went straight to his pocket, fingers already moving to check if any urgent emails had come in during his drive home. Lisa watched this happen and felt her heart break a little more. Even in this moment, even with her standing there having put herself in the most vulnerable position of her life, Jake's first instinct was still work. Really? The word came out of Lisa's mouth as barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the candlelit room like a knife. That single word made Jake freeze. His hand stopped halfway to his phone, and for the first time in months he actually looked at Lisa. Really looked at her. Not the quick glance he'd been giving her lately, but a real look that took in her face, her expression, and what she was trying to tell him. Jake's phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. The sound seemed to wake him up from whatever trance he'd been living in for the past 3 months. Lisa, Jake started to speak, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. How do you apologize to someone for becoming a stranger? How do you explain that you'd gotten so caught up in chasing success that you'd forgotten what success was supposed to be for? Lisa didn't move from where she was standing. The candlelight flickered across her face, and Jake could see that she'd been crying. Not right now, but recently. There were traces of sadness in her eyes that he'd been too busy to notice before. When was the last time you really looked at me? Lisa asked quietly. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the pain underneath it. Jake opened his mouth to answer, then realized he couldn't. He honestly couldn't remember the last time he'd given Lisa his full attention. Everything had become background noise to the constant buzz of work in his head. When was the last time we had a real conversation? Lisa continued. Not about your meetings or my work deadlines, but about us? About what we want? About anything that matters? Each question hit Jake like a physical blow. He stood there in their bedroom doorway, still wearing his work clothes, still carrying his laptop bag, and realized he'd become exactly the kind of person he used to criticize. The kind of person who was so focused on climbing the ladder that they forgot why they wanted to climb it in the first place. I've been trying to get your attention for months, Lisa said, her voice getting stronger. I've left notes in your bag. I've cooked your favorite meals. I've tried to plan dates and trips and simple evenings together. And every single time, work has been more important. Jake wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he was doing all of this for them, for their future. But looking at Lisa standing there, he realized how hollow that excuse was. What kind of future was he building if it didn't include the person he was supposedly building it for? I bought a new dress 3 days ago, Lisa continued, for the dinner at that Italian place where we had our first date. I made reservations. I told you about it. I got ready and waited for you, and you canceled over text. Jake remembered the text he'd sent. Rain check, he'd written, like their relationship was just another appointment that could be rescheduled whenever work got in the way. I sat in that dress for 2 hours, Lisa said, and now her voice was starting to shake. I sat there wondering when I became so unimportant to you that canceling on me felt normal. The words hit Jake harder than any criticism his boss had ever given him. He'd spent 3 months thinking he was working toward something meaningful, but he'd been destroying the most meaningful thing in his life. Lisa, I'm sorry, Jake said, and his voice cracked on the words. I didn't realize that's the problem, Lisa interrupted. You didn't realize. You stopped paying attention to everything except work. You stopped seeing me. You stopped seeing us. Jake looked around their bedroom, really seeing it for the first time in months. Lisa had lit candles everywhere. She'd put on music. She'd created this beautiful romantic scene, and his first thought had been to check his email. What have I become? Jake asked, more to himself than to Lisa. I don't know, Lisa answered honestly, but you're not the person I fell in love with anymore. That person used to care about small moments. He used to notice when I did something special. He used to choose me over everything else, at least sometimes. Jake sat down heavily on their bed, finally dropping his work bag. The laptop inside made a clanking sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. I thought I was building a life for us, Jake said quietly. The promotion, the money, the security. I thought if I could just get through this busy period, we'd have everything we wanted. What's the point of having everything if we don't have each other? Lisa asked. What's the point of financial security if we're not happy? What's the point of a successful career if I'm not part of your life anymore? Jake realized he didn't have good answers to any of those questions. Somewhere along the way, he'd started measuring success only in terms of money and job titles. He'd forgotten that the most successful people he knew were the ones who had built lives they actually wanted to live. I miss you, Lisa said, and those 3 words contained everything Jake had been too busy to see. I miss talking to you. I miss laughing with you. I miss feeling like I matter to you. You do matter to me, Jake said quickly. You're the most important person in my life. Then why don't you treat me like it? Lisa asked. When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you put your phone away when we were together? When was the last time you chose to spend time with me instead of working? Jake tried to think of examples but came up empty. Every conversation they'd had lately had been interrupted by work calls or emails. Every dinner had been eaten while he scrolled through his phone. Every moment they'd spent together had been shared with his job. I've been waiting for you to come back to me, Lisa said. I've been patient and understanding and supportive, but I'm tired of feeling like I'm in a relationship by myself. I'm tired of competing with your career and losing every single time. Jake looked at Lisa standing there in the candlelight and finally understood what she was really saying. This wasn't just about missed dinners or canceled plans. This was about whether they still had a relationship worth saving. I've been thinking about leaving, Lisa said quietly, and those words hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. What? Jake stood up quickly, panic flooding through him. I can't keep living like this, Lisa explained. I can't keep waiting for you to remember that I exist. I can't keep making excuses for why my boyfriend treats me like I'm invisible. For the first time in 3 months, Jake's mind was completely clear of work thoughts. All he could think about was the possibility of losing Lisa and how empty his life would be without her. Please don't leave, Jake said, and he meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. Please, I know I've messed up everything, but please don't give up on us yet. The silence that followed Jake's plea felt like it lasted forever. Lisa stood there in the flickering candlelight, tears streaming down her face, looking at the man she'd loved for 2 years. The man who had just realized he might lose her. I need you to understand something, Lisa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do this tonight to hurt you or to make you feel guilty. I did this because I was desperate. I was desperate to know if you still cared enough about us to notice when something was wrong. Jake sat back down on their bed, his head in his hands. I've been such an idiot, he said. I thought I was working toward our future, but I was destroying our present. Lisa wrapped their bedsheet around herself and sat down beside him, not touching but close enough that Jake could feel her presence. I need to know this isn't just panic talking, she said. I need to know that if I give you another chance, things will actually change. They will, Jake said immediately, then stopped himself. No, that's not fair to you. You've heard me promise things would change before. You have no reason to believe me. For the first time that night, Lisa saw a glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who thought before he spoke, who considered her feelings, who was honest even when it was hard. So what's different now? Lisa asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, really thinking about her question. I guess the difference is that for the first time in months, I'm thinking about what I might lose instead of what I might gain. That night, they talked until the sun came up. Not the quick updates they'd been exchanging for months, but real conversation. Lisa told Jake about all the nights she'd fallen asleep alone, wondering if he even remembered she was there. She told him about the dinner reservations she'd canceled, the movies she'd wanted to see together, the simple moments she'd missed sharing with him. Jake told Lisa about the pressure he'd been feeling at work, about how scared he was of failing, about how he'd convinced himself that if he could just work a little harder for a little longer, everything else would fall into place. He realized as he spoke that he'd been so focused on providing for their future that he'd forgotten to live in their present. I want to fix this, Jake said as morning light started filtering through their bedroom windows. But I don't know how. I don't know how to undo 3 months of being a terrible boyfriend. You don't undo it, Lisa said gently. You move forward differently. The next day, Jake did something he hadn't done in months. He called in sick to work. Not because he was actually sick, but because he needed a day to think about what mattered most to him. He needed a day to remember what life felt like when work wasn't the center of everything. He and Lisa spent that day talking about what they both wanted their relationship to look like. They made lists of things they missed doing together. They talked about their dreams and fears, topics they hadn't discussed in far too long. I want to feel like a priority in your life, Lisa said. I don't need to be the only priority, but I need to feel like I matter enough for you to choose me sometimes. I want to be the kind of person you're excited to see at the end of the day, Jake replied. not someone you have to compete with a job to spend time with. But talking was just the beginning. The real test came in the days and weeks that followed. Jake had to learn how to set boundaries with his work that he'd never set before. He had to practice saying no to extra projects and optional meetings. He had to resist the urge to check his phone every few minutes when he was with Lisa. It wasn't easy. Jake's boss wasn't happy when he started leaving the office at reasonable hours. Some of his coworkers made comments about him slacking off or losing his edge. For a while, Jake worried that he was damaging his career prospects. Lisa had to learn new things too. She had to trust that Jake's changes were real and lasting, not just temporary guilt. She had to speak up when she needed something instead of hoping Jake would notice on his own. She had to stop making excuses for behavior that wasn't acceptable. There were setbacks. 2 weeks after their big conversation, Jake got pulled into a project that required late nights for a week straight. Lisa felt the old fears creeping back in. Was this how it would always be? Would work always come first when things got busy? But this time was different. Jake texted Lisa every hour to let her know how he was doing. He brought her coffee at work one afternoon just to see her for 10 minutes. He made sure she knew that even though he was busy, she was still important to him. When the busy week was over, Jake took Lisa away for a weekend trip to the beach. No laptops, no work calls, just time together to reconnect. They walked along the shore and talked about everything and nothing. They laughed at silly jokes and shared quiet moments watching the sunset. "This is what I missed," Lisa said, holding Jake's hand as they sat on the sand. "Not just the romantic stuff, but feeling connected to you. Feeling like we're a team again." 3 months later, Jake did get his promotion. But by then, his relationship with work had completely changed. The promotion was nice, but it wasn't everything. It was just one part of a life that included many things he valued. Lisa started a new project designing websites for small businesses. Jake was her biggest cheerleader, helping her celebrate each new client and listening to her ideas with genuine interest. He realized he'd missed so much about her creative work during those months when he'd been too distracted to pay attention. 6 months after that terrible night when Lisa had stood in their bedroom wondering if their relationship was over, they moved to a bigger apartment together. This time they were both fully present for the decision. They picked a place with a home office for Jake and a studio space for Lisa. They talked about their future with excitement instead of anxiety. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They still had disagreements and busy periods and stressful days, but they'd learned how to prioritize each other even when life got complicated. They'd learned that love isn't just a feeling you have for someone, it's a choice you make every day about how to treat them. Lisa never regretted taking that risk on the night that changed everything. It had been scary to put herself in such a vulnerable position, but it had forced a conversation they desperately needed to have. Sometimes love requires you to be brave enough to fight for what matters, even when you're not sure you'll win. Jake never forgot the lesson he learned that night about what really matters in life. Years later, when younger colleagues asked him for career advice, he always told them the same thing. Success without someone to share it with isn't really success at all. Their story became proof that relationships can survive almost anything if both people are willing to do the work to make things better. It became proof that sometimes the scariest conversations lead to the most important changes, and it became proof that love, when it's real, is always worth fighting for.